Coming up today, a very good chat with a listener, Kaley Hamilton, who runs a PR agency in Los Angeles. But first, did you see the greenwashing news last week? I don't know if you know this term, greenwashing, but it's where companies who have made really bold environmental or socially conscious claims then have other people prove that maybe they're not quite as watertight as they expected, basically undermining that whole message and even ending up in court or in competition commissions. And the latest moment of this I spotted, the latest development of this I spotted in Australia with the Australian Competition Commission. They've begun investigation into several firms over claims that they've been making. And you can see this kind of thing just becoming more and more prominent. You know, as you've got particularly sort of activist groups who want to try and push the message of the cause that they're after, and they're using the courts, they're using government more and more to try and catch out companies and, of course, to push the cause that they're putting across. I actually did an episode, I think it was last year, where I talked about the importance of actually being able to back up the stuff you put out there, because I think so often in PR, it can be very easy to get a little bit caught up at times in the idea that you want to be putting across. And if you can't back that up and someone comes along and catches you out, then you certainly don't want to be that person in the office who designed that campaign, who put out that message, and then it comes back to actually haunt your organization, which could obviously be very embarrassing. So if you're trying to push that kind of thing, it is so important to have some solid evidence or some solid replies that you can back this up with if someone does come after you. You know, thinking about the environment and being socially conscious is obviously so important now from a PR perspective, putting aside the ethical side of it. As I say, we don't talk about ethics on this show, we talk about the PR perspective. But it is so important that if you're going to put claims out there these days, you can back it up, because it is too easy to be able to catch you out. So also last week, I had a great chat with Kaley Hamilton. It is so good to be talking to you and other listeners of this show and sharing ideas. And we recorded it as much as usual. And Kaley was absolutely wonderful. She was happy to record so much of it. She runs Kaley Media, which is an agency in Los Angeles, and we ended up speaking about a whole bunch of things. You're about to hear from whether Will Smith handled the Oscars crisis right, to picking good clients, to developing narratives that hook the interest of reporters. There's some really good stuff in here, particularly from that reporter perspective as well in this episode today. By the way, no need to make notes as always with this. It will all be in next week's newsletter. So the point you join us here is a little bit after we started chatting, because we've been chatting for a bit. And I wanted to find out a little bit more about her, because I hadn't spoken to Kaley before. So she gives us a little bit about her background. Oh, by the way, Kaley is also a 2-time Emmy award-winning producer and reporter. Here we go.
About 2 years ago, I left my job as a reporter at Us Weekly magazine, and I started my company, Kaley Media. And so, we work to get organic, earned media exposure for founders, creators, entrepreneurs who are in kind of either the marketing industry or the entertainment industry or wellness, and also Web3, which has been fun. So my average day, I guess the number one thing would be keeping up on the news in my clients' industries. That helps with figuring out new pitches, new angles, and then also finding new media contacts. So I keep up on that daily, just kind of check my Google alerts, check the news, stay up to date on all of that. Continuing to build the relationships with the media contacts that I have, keeping in touch with people. Obviously, that's very important. I love brainstorming pitches with my team. We do that daily, weekly, writing pitches. That's really fun and creative. And I kind of have like a pitch framework that we stick to that has been pretty successful. So that's just always a fun task to do every week. And then besides that, I just have meetings, calls with potential clients, collaborators. It's always important to network.
So it can be varied every day for you.
Because then there's also days like this where I talk to you. I'm, putting myself out there, practicing what I preach, because I always preach to my clients, like podcast interviews, say yes to every opportunity, get your name out there as much as possible. That's kind of a day in the life.
I love asking people about campaigns they're currently working on at the moment and some of the things you're learning from it. Can you share something like that with us?
Yeah, definitely. I actually have a client. So it's 2 women, 2 sisters. They're in their early 30s, and they are microdosing psychedelic plant medicine experts. And they have, I know, so interesting.
So hang on. Microdosing, what does that mean? I am not an expert at this.
It's a mental health. So using plant medicine to heal depression, heal PTSD. And they have a mentorship program. So it's kind of a holistic program where they go through physical, mental, spiritual, And then on top of that, you microdose plant medicine. And so they started with me 6 months ago, just starting their business, just starting their mentorship company. And they're based in Colorado in the United States. And in the US, psychedelic plant medicine is only legal right now in 2 states. It just became legalized in Colorado back in November. So when I started with them, it wasn't even technically legal, and they had just started the company brand new, and within 0 to 6 months, they've done a ton of podcasts, interviews, articles, and they just got featured in Forbes just a few weeks ago, which was so exciting for them, and it just made me so happy because they were so happy. It was just a game changer for their business. But yeah, it's been interesting navigating, especially since while working with them, psychedelic plant medicine became legalized in Colorado where they're based. So we hopped on that. Obviously, we got
Yeah, it's a
them
great angle
in
straight away, isn't it? We're doing it. We can advise it. We can be experts on it.
Exactly. Yes, pitching them to local news stations. And as it's become more legalized, now bills are being brought up in California, New York, Massachusetts, and also in Australia. Actually, just a few days ago, it was legalized as medicine. So now they're going
That's
to speak in Australia about it. And it's been fun navigating the news cycle, and it's definitely grown. On top of the news cycle changing around it, they have also done a really good job, obviously, building their business. But also, when working with us, they've really maintained the consistency. And this is something that I always preach to my clients is consistency, saying yes to every opportunity
yes.
that comes. Because when
Mm.
they started, they had zero press. So we started them with the smaller outlets, of course, the smaller podcasts. And obviously, that also helps them to get really used to doing press
Yeah.
interviews. So
Yeah.
that
It's
builds
great
their
practice.
confidence, great practice. And then it really helps our team leverage the press that we're able to get them. And it snowballs and compounds to get more and more and more. Because as we send out more pitches, then we're able to add, by the way, our clients have already spoken on this podcast or
Yeah.
been featured in this
Yeah.
outlet. And so it just helps both sides, and it really
So,
worked out for them.
so where are you with it? I mean, it's fascinating because I was actually talking to a listener the other day who is in the cannabis space, and she's
Mm.
just moved into this, and she was talking about where the market's going to go, how you deal with the politicians, where the narrative is, different parts of society who are against it, and other parts who are for it,
Yeah,
and yet the people who are against it, there's also people from that same demographic who are using these products. So
right.
it's like turning around that narrative. So where are you at this point in terms of the narrative that you're developing? Because I would have thought when you start, I don't know, and this is just me guessing, but with cannabis, more people are kind of getting used to it now. But with psychedelic drugs, there's probably still that kind of 1960s hippie,
Yeah.
but also the fear of people getting stuck in it. It's the same issues, but I imagine it's probably almost a more of a heightened, I dare say paranoia. I'm not a scientist, but a kind of a more extreme reaction. Am I right there?
I know, you're so right, and that's why we focus on really, like, the research that comes out, the
Yeah.
just the research around it and adding that into our pitches, and they also have personal experiences with being healed from depression and eating disorders from that medicine as well, so they're able to share their personal stories, which is also really helpful, and then just kind of putting the spin, just kind of explaining. They're really passionate about explaining how it heals people and helps
Mm.
people so much as opposed to drugs that are on the market now to treat antidepressants or that are antidepressant that are kind of just a band-aid, and they're offering and showing people that psychedelic medicine can be another avenue to heal people who are really struggling, who maybe feel like they've hit a point where there's nowhere else to go with their antidepressants. Maybe it feels like that's just a Band-Aid and they're just yeah, since they've experienced it personally, there's new research coming out all the time. They're able to share their personal experience and they're just it's really fun to listen to them because 'cause they're so passionate about
Yeah,
just
that makes a
helping
huge
people.
yeah. There's
So
so
it
much
just
more
makes a huge
interviewable, aren't there?
difference.
Are they using there's inevitably gonna be people who are gonna go, "Well, this stuff is bad," and they're gonna take that line. So do they I mean, if you've got a personal experience and you can say, "This worked for me," that's a pretty authoritative source of information that you can use to counter those kinds of criticism. So how are they preparing for anyone that comes in with a negative?
Yeah, that's a great question. They are Microdosing Institute certified. They're holistic nutritionists, trauma informed yoga teachers. So they have multiple certifications. And
Yeah.
thankfully, which makes my job easier, they have a lot of expertise. They have a lot of wisdom about
Brilliant.
a lot of topics that they are asked of. So no matter what question is asked, and that's the thing, even reporters who report on this, it's still kind of a new
Yeah.
industry area that people are still figuring out. So even the reporters who ask questions, because I've obviously sat in on some interviews, they're still kind of figuring it out and they're asking their own curious personal questions along with the questions they need for their story. So they don't always super know the answer. And thankfully, my clients just have so much knowledge. And so they're always very prepared no matter what question
So
is
they come
asked.
across as the true expert. And in fact, in some ways, the reporters, because they don't really understand it, it's easier to explain the facts from your perspective because they don't have many other perspectives to go off.
It's true, and
Yeah.
that's what's helpful about being a former reporter myself. I like to just facilitate the conversation and kind of help from reporter to reporter. I know what it's like where you have to do a bunch of research, you're not super aware of the person that you're interviewing or the
Yes.
topic, and so I like to help them, and that also helps my clients where I come up with some interview topics, questions. I'm like, "You can use these if you need, if not, no worries," and then I give them to my clients so then they can also prepare, so that's helpful.
You just reminded me, actually, thinking back to your showbiz thing. I remember being in the studio one time and they pushed in this singer into the studio and I had absolutely no idea who she was.
Oh my gosh.
And this was live radio. And I
Oh,
looked at her and I
no.
was like, you look vaguely familiar.
Mhm.
I just couldn't think of it. And in the end, I did the classic reporter thing of, you are so busy at the moment, aren't you? And just prayed she would give me something to go off. And she said something like, "Oh, do you mean with the campaign that I was doing with that the other day?" And it's like, "Oh, yes, that's what I meant."
That has happened to me, like, being on a red carpet and,
Yeah.
sometimes up and coming people, like, publicists will kind of push their clients over to reporters, which is fine. I love talking to everybody, but sometimes I just have no idea, and you're just in it, and you have to, like, kind of feed and figure out, okay, ask the basic questions, and then hopefully their answers will lead you to figure out who they are.
It just shows, though, that reporters don't know everything. They may come across as confident
Yeah.
and ask these direct questions, but having the knowledge and the confidence to back up what you're answering can often win because they don't know as much as you do if you know your
Yes.
stuff.
Yes, 100%.
So where would you take it next, do you think? So you're in that stage at the moment where they're just sort of kind of educating people, but what do you think is the next phase to kind of keep that story going? Or is it just a question of building the outlets?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's a matter of building now that it's been 6 months and they're getting top tier press. Obviously, I still like to maintain the momentum and still have them do just as many press interviews as possible. Obviously, focus on the top tiers, them out to other outlets that haven't spoken to them. And then now they're looking into doing speaking engagements at different conferences, and so kind of expanding their repertoire when it comes to gaining their, like, credibility and authority in the industry.
Excellent. Right, Will Smith. What would you have done
Yeah.
with him? I mean,
Oh
do you
my
think he
gosh.
handled it right? I mean, you saw the classic at the beginning, didn't you? After the slap, he then went quiet. He had that time of reflection. He disappeared. He found himself rather than responding. In Variety, I think it was, that came out and was saying he's doing a lot of damage by keeping quiet. And it's like, no, actually, I think he's doing the right thing by keeping quiet. And
Yeah.
then he kind of did his public, this is where I'm at. He did that video on
Mhm.
Instagram, didn't he? And now he seems to be back to business as normal. How would you have handled it? I mean, you're an ex-showbiz. I would love to get your thoughts on this because there's so many different views. But I'd love to know what you would have done.
Oh my gosh, that is such a good question.
Do you think
I
he handled
think
it right? The
gosh,
way
it's difficult to say if there's a right and wrong, like,
Yeah,
going
yeah,
back, I don't even know if I would have changed anything. I'm like you said, I'm glad he stayed quiet for the time that he did, and then
yep,
coming out in front of it and just being, I would have told him to be so vulnerable and to
yeah.
really put his kind of personal traumas, wounds out there to the public. Because when somebody explains, like, okay, I have these issues, they haunt me in this way, it is what it is, I'm human, then people can relate to that and people can just be aware that that's okay. So I'm glad that he put himself out there in that way, but even still, like, when I think of Will Smith, my mind still goes back to that moment, and
You can't
yes,
get it out your head, can you? Because
you
that's it.
cannot.
That's the association now. And it's like,
It
how are
was so
you?
intense.
You look at his feeds now, and he's basically treating it as like nothing ever happened. it's going to take a long time for him to rehabilitate, isn't it?
Yeah, because I mean, the news cycle is 24/7. Things
Yeah.
pump out constantly. Crisis stuff gets lost in the mix. People forget about it. There's so much content being pumped out. But when it comes to Will Smith, he's the biggest actor in the world on the biggest stage
Yeah.
in Hollywood.
Yeah.
That is just it is what it is. It's just gonna take time before it dies down in people's minds. This is what it is.
Kaley, it's been absolutely awesome talking to you. Don't forget, you can get my key thoughts from this in the newsletter next week. If you go to thepublicrelationspodcast.com, thepublicrelationspodcast.com, and click on the weekly newsletter link, you can sign up for that if you aren't signed up already, and that will be on its way to you next week. I think there are a bunch of takeaways, but this was actually one of my favorites that I think a lot of people do forget, and that is the importance of having a new angle. I talked about this before, about challenging the narrative if you're trying to get reporters to pay attention, but when you think about it from a reporter's perspective, they want to be the one who got the new angle. They want to be the person that reveals that news for the first time. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's groundbreaking. It doesn't mean the world's changed. It could be a twist. It could be a different fact. But it should be something that other people don't have yet. One of the things about being a reporter is about breaking news. It's about being at the front. It's about being that journalist who stands out in the office because they got something that other people didn't have. So if you go and deliver that to them, or you go and give them a new hook, then that's going to certainly push your story above the others. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, well, Kaley was talking about celebrities here, and everything in the celebrity world is a new angle on their personality. And in your industry, nothing is particularly new. But if you think about it, almost everything you do has some kind of new angle to it. And you want to be highlighting that. You want to point out in your pitch or when you're talking to the reporter why this is a new angle that other people haven't talked about before. Now, maybe there just hasn't been anyone that's talked about it, but in which case, point that out and tell them why this is something worth covering. One thing you can actually try straight away is if you have a look at your latest pitch, whether you've got it on Google Drive or whether you've got it in front of yourself if you're at the office at the moment, or just think about it in your head again. If you think about what you put out there, did it feel new? Did it feel like you were emphasizing a new angle, or did it feel like it was just generic, part of the stuff that comes out about what you do, or did it maybe even feel like old news? Often it only takes a few changes of words to make something come across in a better way, to emphasize that newness. I mean, phrases like, I don't know whether you know, or we've spotted a new trend which is appearing, or there has been a jump in X happening. It's all these sorts of phrases which are emphasizing why something has changed, why it's new. There were a bunch of other things that came out of Kaley's chat with me that I thought were really good. I mean, we talked about it last week in episode 21. Last week, where she was talking about how to get really good clients on board, and one of the importance of making sure you get good clients and how to select them. And there's so much more that Kaley gave us. There's some great points about the future of PR and what we should be looking out for from her perspective as well, because she's really involved in Web 3.0. So some really good stuff still to come up on future episodes. Right, so much still to do, as I was mentioning earlier in the week. I've actually got a friend of mine, a former political editor I used to work with, who's in my city at the moment. He's just let me know, so I'm going to have to meet up with him. And also, actually, I'm going to Seoul, South Korea in May. Person I used to work with in radio is a TV reporter and a TV host there. And I keep forgetting about him because he moved to the other side of the world. I'm going to be going there. So what a great opportunity to try and connect with him again. So much to do. I hope you are having an equally busy week. And I hope it's rounding up well, and have an absolutely awesome weekend. I'll speak to you next week with loads more.